She threatens to kill him, and Ray calls him Rofa's Ray Lightrays. After which he explains that the next heir of the Lightrays family cannot die like this, and he will not accept it, and the woman screams that no, no, no. He gives directions to the route belt. A man asks Rofas where he is going. Another man promises to prevent it. When Ray declares that he will not let the nightmare become reality and will do everything to overcome his destiny, the man addresses him as young master. Carlos notices Ray's pensive expression and asks him to stop. Ray, 12, wants to commemorate the anniversary of Carlos's death. He then says he's ready to die any day due to old age. The servant explains that his life depends on his master's mercy. He notices the coffee's aroma has improved and warns that it should not be drunk after his death. Ray asks Carlos to promise to live a long life for the sake of coffee. Carlos replies that he will live long enough. Ray remarks that he's been up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. Carlos explains that he's provoking him and asks how many magic tutors have been fired already. The man then asks for the reasons behind his opinion. He explains that he's already told Carlos about the uselessness of perfume and suggests repeating it. He says he had a dream, and then explains that it was a nightmare. Meanwhile, the main character, a young commoner, entered the Magic Academy, was despised for his origins, but united with his comrades, defeated the Demon King and saved the world from the God of Darkness. He married the princess of the country and became its king. And then the man calls the story exciting, but Ray says the opposite and asks Carlos for coffee. He claims he was shown 5 chapters of the story of a commoner who had been through a lot. The man explains that the story needs to be expanded, and the villain's motivations need to be more relatable. Then he expresses surprise that he was appointed editor. At the same time, he notes that there is something in the first and second chapters that worries him more and requires attention. He reveals that in these chapters, other villainous aristocrats, including himself, die at the hands of good heroes. Plus, he asks if he was a villain and what kind of villainy he did, and he explains that it was actually quite funny. Ray says that in the first chapter they bullied the main character, and the man admits that he was a small but cunning villain. He also becomes a subordinate of the second Demon King, the Shadow Wolf Rofas. The man says that his death in Chapter 2 was boring and asks if the other considers it shameful. Ray reports his death in the first act. The man mentions Carlos, the Dark Butler, and rejoices in his dream for his protection. In the end, he says they're both dead and there's no point. The man explains he woke up and suggests they follow the plan, to which he agrees. The voice announces that there is a herbalism practice in the garden in the morning and an economics lecture in the afternoon. After which Ray asks what happened. The man explains that a fallen tree blocked the road, and several people turn to Mr. Rofas and ask what is going on. He asks about the detour and says that they don't value time, then shouts that whoever wants to live should move away, and uses the dark scythe technique. As Ray destroys the wooden structures, 2 women admire his magic and note that he nearly hit them. He claims his firewood has been chopped and asks for help with the cleaning. She explains that he's difficult to understand, but he's always like that and calls him the best master. The man then asks them to be kinder when dealing with people, and Ray explains that the reason is his decision to help them with their work. But that's not the point. He explains that all servants undergo training and says that the master appears rude and arrogant, but is actually an ordinary boy his age. The man says the misunderstanding could have been avoided, then suggests saying a kind word to the servants to relax them. Following this, Ray speaks of his duties as an aristocrat, emphasizing the importance of preserving the family's grandeur. He explains that as the future head of the family, he will perform duties that include lectures and classes on economics, etiquette, magic, arithmetic, linguistics, and martial arts, and also mentions the labor of commoners. He believes that it is necessary to maintain a strict appearance and wonders how it is possible to govern a country without the use of force. Meanwhile, he remains at the window, explaining that it was a prophetic dream. Ray reports that Carlos was incredulous, but very detailed and colorful. And then he mentioned that besides the commoner who became the king of the country, there were other memorable characters present. She has heard Raymond's name, though she has never met him, and wonders why she obeys him and why the Duke's son calls himself a demon lord. At the same time, he wonders what will change when he enters the academy. He argues that life is not worth wasting on the road, and that we need to look for other ways. He also asks who it is and explains that it is the main character of yesterday's dream. He claims that this time things are different. Furthermore, Rofus warns not to move forward, while the other is surprised by what he sees through the eyes of the shadow wolf. Ray warns that the dream could be deadly, as he will not be able to defeat the balls of darkness. Ultimately, his magical power is exhausted before the battle begins. He feigns calm, continues fighting, and calls the shadow wolf an idiot. She says she won't let him die, and Ray looks at her insistently, after which she threatens to kill him, demanding he stop. He explains that he's not resisting, not moving, and is surprised that she doesn't know his name. He screams that it hurts and wonders if it's just a dream. When the man orders them not to go any further, Ray explains that it is a different spell and this time it is not the same, despite the warning about the end. He screams that he is burning alive and feels pain and smells, and the other man calls him a shadow wolf. He then says that there must be another way and orders them not to go any further, and Ray screams that he will not forgive the traitor of humanity and is struck by wind magic, noting that death is different, but the pain is still just as strong. The women blame Ray for the high taxes that plague the villagers. Ray is outraged that he is being killed more than once. He then says that there must be another way, shouts at them not to go any further, plebeians, and explains that it's simply not fair because he waited for the shadow wolf and the others to finish their actions. He says it's the root of darkness and a black robe. Then he's surprised that it's hard to believe, and asks if it's just him who finds it strange. Meanwhile, Ray says he's been stabbed, chopped, and burned, and is in pain all over and doesn't understand why it keeps happening, while the other man asks for it to stop, explaining that his mind feels like it's been turned to mush. He lies down and talks about how tired he is. Then we see the ceiling of the room and a view of a large mansion from the outside. And then Ray asks the man if it's really Carlos. Carlos says he is a personal butler, cries and tries to say something, kneeling down. At the same time, Ray loudly declares to Carlos that he is no longer ready to die, and tears flow from his eyes, expressing suffering and despair. He screams. She explains that he is crying. The man asks if it is the master, after which he abruptly pulls away. Ray also explains that he came running at his master's first call. The man apologizes and says he came straight from work, then explains that he seems to have returned to normal. He's usually confident, but this time he's flustered. Everyone in the mansion is surprised. Furthermore, Ray demands to return to work, while the two maids are surprised and say that they have become motivated to work because of Ray's red nose and cute appearance. He says he needs a separate house. He's surprised they heard him cry. The man asks them to forget about it. He says he had a nightmare. In the end, Ray explains that he has been dreaming about a bad sign for 2 days in a row, and he believes that this is true. The man says he has experienced death many times and does not want to repeat the experience. He then claims that if this is true, then he is destined to die like this, but refuses to accept his sad fate, explaining that it may not be true. Ray claims that with enough magical power he could have won. He explains that if he hadn't become one of the 4 heavenly kings, the battle wouldn't have happened. The man asks why he chose to play the villain. When the story begins to move forward 3 years later, the heroes will arrive there, and there is no need to look for points of contact with the main character. He talks to Carlos about taxes. Carlos explains that it really is milk. Ray then recounts an episode of a village suffering from taxes due to a sea monster, while the man explains that the taxes there are no higher than elsewhere. He mentions the name Roguebelt, and the man explains that it is a small, remote fishing village in their territory. Following this, Ray asks the man about taxes in the village of Routebelt. The man, despite feeling unwell, intends to ask about her plans and hopes for a clue to the story. He explains that he's died in the nightmare many times and can't be mistaken. The man asks Mr. Rofus where they're going. Rofus explains that they're going to Routebelt and urges them to move faster. Meanwhile, the man reports the need for security with the permission of the head of the family and promises to take security and a carriage, notifying the father of his responsibility. Ray said he wanted to eat fresh fish as soon as possible, as his future depended on it. The man listened and prepared everything, after which Ray told him to go. And then he says that he is not the only one who died, and Carlos too, explains that he will not forgive God for taking away from him what belongs to him. Ray declares that he will accept the challenge of fate and build a future where he can survive. At the same time, he decides to go to the fishing village of Roguebelt to change the future. While the man expresses doubts about the veracity of this story, Ray notices that this is strange. Furthermore, he explains that this is the Roguebelt with the remote fishing village of Roguebelt visible in the background. He notices that it is too deserted here. Moreover, 3 years later he met Roguebelt. The protagonist came here to defeat a sea monster. The girl joined his party, and they were exhausted by taxes, but at least there were people there. He says he has to find a lead in Roguebelt and not return home empty-handed, and she says she chopped off his head the most furiously of all. In the end, Ray wanted to eat the fish, but the man explained that he had a short memory and said that from a distance he mistook it for a doghouse, noting Carlos' keen eye. The man apologizes, the other is surprised. After which the man explains that he has nothing to sell. Another remarks that there is almost nothing left here and that he is wasting his time, and the third apologizes for disturbing and wants to ask a couple of questions on behalf of the gentleman. The man says he serves the young master, and Ray offers to soften his rough treatment. When a man says that his interlocutor has an ingrained slave mentality, another man explains that the young gentleman is simply uneducated, and he understands this. Ray asks for hospitality, and the man says the information was worth money. Ray mentions that the man is a gold slave and demands to hear it again. The man then yells at Lily to stop, and the girl in the dress is surprised when he orders her to hide. She asks for forgiveness and explains that her father needs to be forgiven for his rudeness. Following this, a man orders the head to be raised. Ray explains that it is customary to bow one's head in front of such people. Another man is surprised by the circus and calls the girl a young lady, and a group of people ask if everything is okay with the old man, noticing the scream and Leica on the floor. He calls him an evil old man. The man is surprised and says he made Lilichka kiss his shoes and that he has a gun. Meanwhile, the man denies his guilt. The woman accuses him of indifference to the child and calls him Clinton's henchman. And Ray is outraged by the hasty conclusions and accusations. The man is surprised that Clinton for Serpent is a local official. Then Ray is surprised that an official in the route belt was behind the unreasonably high taxes, and asks for someone who speaks human language to find out as much as possible about Clinton. He asks who he thinks he is. At the same time, he warns that touching great means risking one's life, while the other clarifies that they are dealing with a real aristocrat. Gray apologizes for the sudden crowd surrounding him and explains that they were mistaken in thinking someone had laid a hand on Lilia. Ray says he's an aristocrat but doesn't introduce himself. He also says the girl has a good sense of etiquette, though she overdoes it. He explains that at least the man is approachable. He's at least experienced, and while he may be rude, he's smart. Ray asks her to extend her left hand, and she is surprised. Furthermore, she agrees. He asks her to dance, and she is surprised when he takes her hand. Ray explains that he is returning. Lisa admires his gentlemanliness. John insists that he is not a villain, and a group of people rejoice at the lack of hard feelings. In the end, the man claims that the young gentleman came without malicious intent. Otherwise, he would not have come to the village in person. Ray apologizes to the aristocrat and his servant. The man smiles. After which he explains that fighting here is tantamount to treason and the entire village could be executed. But he says that such is the royal law. The man claims he can't be defeated and thanks her for her mercy. Ray says she's not interested in listening to the man and offers him a chance to bow his head if he wishes. When he heard this, he asked where the woman had come from, noting that she was clearly not with Clinton. Ray asks the man if they're on bad terms. The man replies that if he sees his mug, either he or she will die, calling it a bad relationship, to say the least. He then says he is talking to a barbarian, and the man explains that he does not understand. He says that he hides the plundering of the village under the guise of taxes and turns women into barbarians with his attitude towards them. Following this, he says that he shouldn't have spoken like that in front of the child, and a voice from behind calls out to Greg. A man warns of the approach of Clinton's men. Another announces his arrival. Ray asks to protect the young gentleman, and a third asks to remain silent. Meanwhile, he explains that if the situation gets serious, it's worth contacting the Light Res family, claiming that there's a similar scoundrel there, but he'll think about it. He admits to misunderstanding, and Ray claims that rudeness is his sin. Then he orders them to hand over everything valuable and threatens death to those who resist. But the men reply that they have nothing to give. The soldier declares he will take it in blood. Ray sits on the couch and he stands nearby. The man and the girl warn their father to run, explaining that they've hidden a young girl and mentioning family heirlooms. At the same time, he says what he will do, and above one can hear cries of pain, requests to take the silver and statements that this is his precious daughter. He asks if they can do anything about Clinton, and the other explains that without the permission of the head of the family, he is not sure. Moreover, Ray promises to collect evidence and find out the reason, while the man addresses him as a young master. He's surprised by the opportunity. The man explains that he can already rule a small territory and sees himself as the future head of the family. The other man orders his grandfather killed if he resists. Besides, she will check the goods. He begs her to save him, and the man thinks that this is an excellent reason to intervene. The man walked away, calling Ray a fool. Ray explained that robbing his master was impossible. Finally, the knight promises to show the wrath of a commoner and asks if the man knows marquee lighters. The man screams. Ray reports that the attack didn't harm Carlos. Carlos explains that he's bleeding and attacked him, calling him master, after which he reports that he wounded a loyal servant and asks if this means his betrayal of the Light Res family. He says this will be enough to punish Clinton and orders the use of the smoke of darkness. Ray tells them to move on, and several people shout to the captain as he is thrown out by a dark hand. As he shouts the order to kill the two, he addresses the group of people below. The man asks if they should all get rid of them, and Ray says to know when to stop. He then explains that the barbarians are hard to tell apart, so he leaves it all to him, and he confirms that there are. Ray explains that she can't fight. The man screams in pain, and Finn watches from the roof of the house. Following this, the man jumps and strikes, while two masked men watch the action as the other man falls down from the blow. The man says that the old man defeated all the soldiers, and the other asks who he is. Meanwhile, he notices that he is moving slowly, but Ray claims that this is acceptable. He says that this is the swordsmanship technique of the Light Res family's Dark Knights, which they have not forgotten even in their old age. And then the man shouts to tell his Clinton. Another demands that he come himself, promising to beat his face in, and Ray explains that now he can be punished through the courts. He explains that he got rid of the officers and released the rank and file. The man asks if they are now fleeing to Clinton's mansion. At the same time, Ray tells everyone to report to him directly to save time, while he notices a strange feeling over the field and is surprised by it. He heard something from the sea and felt a wave of magical power pulling him to the ocean floor. He realized it was it and wondered if it was too soon, given the dream and the fact that it wasn't supposed to appear for 3 years. Moreover, it is the Demon King's familiar, one of the 4 demonic beasts, the Sea Devil Straff. He is surprised. In addition, the man notices that she is looking sadly at the sea and asks if she wants to leave. Ray notices that Carlos isn't responding to the wave. The man explains that there's enough evidence, but asks not to tell his father. He says they're heading to the Clinton mansion. In the end, he says that he is Klington for Serpent and offers to see what the interlocutor is like. Ray is bored. He then asks who used his family's name and is surprised that it's connected to the robbery. Official Clinton for Serpent explains that he will send his men to collect taxes and find the culprits. He is surprised by the excuses. The man explains that people make up reasons not to pay, and Ray says that he doesn't care and asks why tax collection is slow. When he explains that monsters have taken up residence in the sea and are interfering with fishing, he also claims that they cannot send fishermen to their deaths. Ray reports that Roguebelt is having trouble fishing and asks if there is a connection to the monster attack. He then explains that he saw it in a dream, but thinks it impossible for it to happen in 3 years, and the other man says that there is no dungeon there and doubts the monster invasion. Ray says one of the reasons for his death is Royubelt, which needs to be dealt with. He and the girl say these are the first signs of things to come. Following this, the Kraken Sea Devilstraff will appear in Routebelt, which only the story's protagonist can defeat. He explains that to defeat the enemy he used a powerful weapon money. Meanwhile, Ray reports that he found what he was looking for in the next room and in the basement, while the man says that he was waiting for Carlos because of his chatter. He says he can't afford to be weak and smiles, showing determination. And then Ray reports that his servant has discovered evidence of all the crimes, including extortionate taxes, banditry and kidnapping, to which the man is surprised. The man says he hid the money underground and can get it, but he doesn't understand what he's talking about. At the same time, he claims that he earned this amount with blood and sweat. He said he was going to kidnap the brat. Besides, he can't let Ray stay. Ray refuses to leave and asks him to explain why. He asks Carlos why he raised his hand and if there is a question, and Carlos explains that he wants to signal the armed men in the next room. Furthermore, Ray explains that this is an assassination attempt on the highest aristocracy and asks if he can add another crime to the list. The man replies that everyone has already gone to bed. He announced his death. In the end, the man shouts that he will give up all the money and begs for mercy. Another explains that it is impossible to bribe the Lytrace family, and Ray says that they managed to get the money and now they need to get the weapons. He clarifies that the sale of weapons is regulated by law, becomes irritated by a person who is indifferent to life, and asks whether it is possible to use a snake that can only close. After which Ray forgives the crimes, and Hank is surprised. He promises to do everything with joy, claiming it's a way to atone for his sins. He highly values these words and admires the deed. When Ray explains the need to destroy the monsters terrorizing Roguebelt, the man listens intently. He explains that monsters shouldn't appear here and asks the aristocrat to be closer to the people. The man asks if the commoners can handle it themselves. He then explains to gather men, weapons, and warships, and the other one is surprised that there is so much. Ray explains that he needs to use his connections and the money he has saved up by tomorrow morning. The man is surprised by the impossibility and agrees to do everything. Following this, he explains to the gentleman what kind of expression Carlos has on his face. He asks where they learned such tricks. Meanwhile, he asks if Ray wants to tell her father. Ray explains that she will remain silent if that's what they want. The man speaks clearly. He said he needed to gather more information to pass on to his father. The man replied, "As you wish." He was considering getting rid of the fishing problem and seizing every opportunity and coin. And then she says that there are many and big ones, and 3 sailing ships are sailing on the sea under the bright sun. Ray reports that they are being attacked from the sea. He is surprised by the number of ships, then screams and rushes to a woman with a child. At the same time, he asks if it hurts and if she can walk after the fall, and she replies that she can. He says that her strength is immediately visible and calls her the child of Routebelt. Besides, he remains silent, watching as someone runs towards the ships on the shore. Ray declares that they have failed to achieve victory on land and are launching an attack from the sea. He promises to protect everyone, while the man names the ship Routebelt. He also states that he thought they would never come back and notes that the place isn't the best. But it's not that bad. Ray asks if he's the first one to see them. The man explains that they disappeared yesterday without even saying goodbye, but have now reappeared. He eventually explains that it's time to clean up the mess and asks if they could have avoided paying taxes because of the monsters. And the man is surprised that all the ships are gathered to hunt monsters. Ray believes that monsters must be completely destroyed, and the man recognizes Ray as his most beloved aristocrat, although yesterday he disliked him for his aristocracy. Then he asks about the other problem. He explains that he made up the snake problem. The man is surprised and asks if he's talking about the wedge. Suddenly, someone falls, and the man screams in shock. Ray screams for him to stop. The man with the sword refuses to give in, and the tied-up man screams in panic. As the man strikes the board with his sword, he suddenly dodges and runs towards a group of people on the pier. Ray is surprised. He says he didn't expect this turn of events. He then reports that Carlos's leg is fine, but calls him a fool. For the first time, he felt the urge to kill the bastard, and Ray noticed him from afar, became quick and aimed at the main one. Following this, the aristocrat came to help, and another man called Fola an idiot for attacking the village's benefactor. The man confirms his rightness, the other does not allow liars into the village, and Ray promises to speak to him in an understandable language, surprised by his words. Meanwhile, Fall loudly declares his unforgiveness for deception in the village. He asks the man if he deceived him. The man replies that he shouldn't interfere, but Fall insists that everything has changed. He says it's easy to dodge, and the attackers shout that he's a good aristocrat. Papa and Lilia also confirm this. Then Ray asks what he means by it. Ray talks about a big swing and insists he can't be fooled. The man explains that he drove raiders out of the village and fits the description of a good aristocrat. He judges superficially, promises to teach, and attacks the enemy. Meanwhile, Ray explains the essence of a good aristocrat, and the enemy counters, claiming that this isn't Ray's style. Then Ray attacks and knocks him down. He claims the enemy's attacks are predictable. Another explains that he is the youngest of the three brothers, the most reckless, and advises the leader to raise his son. Besides, he is silent and asks not to forgive. She argues that we can't forgive the light races. Ray explains that we can't forgive the aristocrats and Clinton, and he shouts that we can't forget about Runo. He also says that there are only bastards among them and explains that he is a good aristocrat. Ray is struck by magic and attacks the woman. Eventually, he notices the fiery creature and dodges the attack. Ray summons a dark hole, destroying the wooden structure, after which he quickly runs along the log, leaving traces behind him. Ray remains silent, and the man explains that it is healing magic and names Carlos. When he asks to add martial arts lessons to his schedule, the man explains that he hates losing, and the other man agrees to fulfill his request. He says that yesterday he could have killed him, but today he was lucky, and Ray asks for forgiveness. He then said that he had been hunting monsters with some other youths yesterday and was surprised that someone else could use magic. He claims that Four and the other guys are talented and offers to take them along to clear out the monsters, claiming that they will be grateful. Following this, Ray declares the need for commoners to submit to the aristocracy, promising payment. The man is surprised by the strict regime, but is pleased by the news. He says that the interlocutor is always busy. Meanwhile, he's confident this fleet is sufficient to destroy the sea monsters and resume fishing. The man is surprised. Log reveals that he is Greg's eldest son and the new leader, asking for the sea to be handed over to him, calling it his path. Ray merely nods in response, and then he says this guy looks better than a baby shark, and the other man yells, "Who's the shark here?" He shouts that he wanted to run away, and the man is surprised that For should have been in the village, and For explains that he is both there and here. At the same time, he shouts that they haven't finished yet, and Ray says that he has already lost to him. He explains he used the Black Hand. The man orders them to carry out his orders and throw someone overboard. The other man says that's too much. Moreover, he shouts, "Brother," and explains that he is sealed in a barrel. One says he won't keep an eye on him. Another remarks that he was poorly raised. A third is surprised that he went over to the enemy. He also says that all he cares about now is work, and Ray explains that he is happy with everything as long as it is for the sake of the goal. Clinton advises against trusting the brat, warning of possible betrayal. Another points to the aristocrats on the second ship, emphasizing their hostility and asking about possible threats. In the end, he asks for silence, and Ray claims that he guessed correctly and demands confirmation. He is silent and he shouts that he is short and he is surprised. After which Ray says that he will finish everything with one blow. The man warns not to move. Another is surprised by the size of the creature, and the third admires the magic and recognizes it as a worthy opponent, until the sea serpent appears. He declares that he has succeeded, while the others are amazed by the sea snake at the pier. When Ray sees that the creature has red eyes, it growls and appears in front of him on the bridge. He shouts, "Spheres of darkness," and the woman takes cover behind the fence. He then thanks the chief for saving him and expresses surprise that he's never seen such a creature before. Ray explains that the group of heroes encountered powerful enemies whose red eyes glowed in the dark and were likely connected to the Demon King. He declares that he is ready for anything and explains that everything is going according to plan. Ray then notes that the work isn't over yet and that vigilance is essential. He claims he understood the situation and didn't expect complete safety here. The man shouts about the approaching Rifisa and climbs the stairs. Meanwhile, Ray asks if his legs are holding him back. The man laughs and wonders where his old courage has gone, and the other man tries to hold back his laughter. The man is surprised that the boy made him laugh. The boy shouts that he has the courage to fight the sea dragon. And then Ray says that he didn't want to waste his energy on small fish, and confirms this. He claims that he does not need help, as he is a powerful magician, and for him this is not the duty of an aristocrat. At the same time, Ray insists that his responsibilities come first and he can't do everyone's work. The man, however, is dissatisfied and doesn't understand why they need help when they only met yesterday. He is surprised that they are teaching idiots, but he explains that for an aristocrat it is important to fulfill his duty, and his own interests are not important. He also clarifies that he is saving them not only because of the threat of monsters, but also because their presence could harm the fishing industry. Ray says the problem could harm the kingdom's economy. She is also surprised that he thinks she is lying, and he explains that he is stuck because everything is very complicated for him. Ray says he can't explain everything, that no one would believe him if he told him what he saw in a dream, and that he is simply fighting to avoid death. In the end, he screams that it irritates him and he is surprised. Ray stated that he came of his own free will, even without his parents' permission, and suggested that they check with them themselves if they had any doubts. After which the boy laughs and says that he is just a runaway, and is surprised, asking what of it. Ray is confident that nothing will stop him once he's made up his mind. He's ready to risk his life. The other is glad that Ray understands and asks him to climb back into the barrel. When one of them explains that even sea dragons don't hunt alone, the other is surprised and asks if everything is okay if he doesn't interfere. He promises to help and is ready to acknowledge his interlocutor. He then asks what he's going to say and is happy about it, and Ray says he's amazed and asks if he realizes who he's talking to. He mocks his height. The man expresses dissatisfaction. The other turns to the young master, surprised by his desire to use magic. Following this, the man says that the young man is hot-tempered, but good, and Ray threatens to throw him into the sea if he does not obey. He says he doesn't remember anyone being in the rublet in his dream, suggesting that they may have left the village or lost their life fighting the aristocrats. Meanwhile, Ray notices that Finn's determination gives him goosebumps. He then explains that they have an exciting voyage ahead. He tells Carlos that he has eyeliner and asks where there is fun swimming around. And then Ray tells the story of the beginning of her unforgettable adventure. Lighter's territory is the northeastern coast. The further north the fleet traveled, the more monsters attacked them. Chapter 5. Time to finish the devil. At the same time, the shark-headed monster leaps forward with his arms outstretched and his mouth wide open. One calls for the destruction of all men, another says to thank the aristocrat, a third says that for once to defeat all the monsters for the village, and a fourth warns not to trust the black-haired man. Besides, he explains that it's not about that, and the other man shouts that the black-haired man can come down and help them. Ray notes that he doesn't play with children, explaining the difference between an aristocrat and a commoner. He also claims that he can defeat a sea dragon with one finger and demands proof, and the man asks if he is going to lift a finger. The man explains that Ray is having fun, and Ray talks about his age, his duties as a nobleman, and his loneliness. He commends the bravery of the local sailors and marvels at their ability to repel the horde. As a result, the man notices the boy's potential and expresses confidence in his successful future. Ray explains to the man that the map points the way to the island. The man is surprised, and the two people sitting nearby listen in on the conversation. The man at the helm watches them, after which he asks what is the matter. The man suggests turning back, and the two men explain that if they continue moving north, they will find themselves in the domain of the sea devil in half a day. He says that a demon lives in those waters and devoured ships 300 years ago, but Ray says that this is a legend known to all sailors and considers it a fairy tale. When he shouts that everyone who enters those waters never returns, and explains that it is true. He claims that ships have disappeared in the indicated direction and warns of possible danger. Ray then explains that the sea devil causes discomfort even through the magical barrier, and the man asks Carlos if he is okay. He claims the magical power in the air is thick and viscous. Carlos apologizes to the young master. Following this, Ray speaks of his magical powers, despite his normal status. While the two men are busy with business on deck, he explains it's water. The man asks if he's okay and if he gets seasick. He thanks the old man and asks how he is. Meanwhile, Ray suggests turning back, while the other insists he can't be seasick, but he's feeling dizzy. They discuss the possibility of a ship-eating devil. He explains that the fleet was assembled not to kill small monsters, but to kill the Kraken. It will be easier to negotiate now, although no one but him knows this. And then Ray says that they have no reason to turn back, and offers to get rid of the devil that devours ships. He is surprised, and the other explains that they came to destroy the source of all monsters, most likely the sea devil, and that he already knew that they would not stop at small things. At the same time, Ray notes that the situation is much more serious, and Finn explains that it will not be as easy with him as with the monsters. He claims that his head is empty, and the man explains that he is often called that. Besides, if they kill the manta ray, they'll be able to fish again. Ray thinks this is the most likely, but Finn firmly says there's no choice but to kill the bastard. He explained that he had not revealed his goals, so the other could not know about them, and suggested heading north to meet the sea devil. He also claims that as he gets older, he will become stronger and be able to defeat an opponent the size of a sea dragon. But Ray reminds him to be humble. A sailing ship sails on a calm sea under a full moon and clouds. In the end, one says that they just need to wait until the creature shows up, and the other explains that he has already decided everything and there is nothing to be afraid of, and wonders if it is true that the creature they are hunting lives here. Ray clenches his fist to his chest and sits cross-legged on the wooden surface. After which he says he's interfering with his meditation, and the other one is surprised to find something he caught with his eyes closed. He explains he didn't come to argue. He claims that she never eats in the evening, and she explains that he shouldn't worry about her. When Ray apologized, the other didn't understand why he came for food and apologized for jumping to conclusions and the attack on the pier. He emphasizes the shared goal of getting rid of demons and urges them not to quarrel. He asserts that he must carry out all orders, even if it means killing, and admits that such a desire has already arisen. She then reveals that 6 months ago, Clinton's people took away her childhood friend because of unpaid taxes. He says that robberies were carried out under the pretext of collecting taxes, and commoners had to endure them, and explains that an aristocrat should not go unpunished. Following this, he resolves to protect everyone in the village. He explains that these feelings awakened hatred within him, which he then unleashed on another, and asks for forgiveness. He admits his ignorance of what's happening and believes the main problem here is Clinton, whom he directs his hatred at. Ray wonders why his father allowed Clinton to do such things. Meanwhile, he says his father wouldn't have given Clinton a chance if he'd known the truth. He claims he simply slipped through the cracks, adding that the apple tasted sour. He says he doesn't believe what's happening, and then he explains that when he eats them, his face becomes like this, and asks if they have any aristocrats. Ray is surprised. The man says he doesn't want to talk to commoners and orders him to leave unless he has anything new. At the same time, he asks to talk to him if arguing is the only way out. He is surprised and agrees. He offers a rematch and assures that he will win. He also explains that she's preventing him from meditating peacefully and advises him to remove his magical power if he wants to fight. She's surprised, asking what kind of power it is, and he explains that it's rare among commoners, but she has it. He marvels at the possibilities of witchcraft, and Ray says that power lies in magic that must be learned to use. Besides, he thought everything was simple, while the other man felt defeated. He tells him to train, and Ray explains that it will help him achieve more. Ultimately, he claims that by repeating the old butler's method, he can become stronger. The old butler, in turn, appeared strong. Ray screams, after which he stands in front of a giant sea dragon, and the other is surprised that the sea dragon has appeared again. He claims it's a kraken. Ray says the kraken is a huge creature. Another man asks Carlos if they're under attack, and the woman turns to the master. When he explains that it is a ship-eating demon planning to sink the entire ship, the other tells Carlos to fight, and he confirms. He demands that Grandpa show him what he can do. Grandpa agrees to give it a try and begins attacking the giant octopus. Ray then shouts that it is Dark Scythe and attacks the giant octopus. He announces that the master is attacking and activates a dark barrier to protect the ship. Following this, the man explains that the enemy has gone underwater and is looking for an opportunity to strike back. He tells his grandpa that he's cool, and the other one explains that his father warned him about his coolness. Meanwhile, the man asks what they learned, and Ray laughs that he didn't understand what happened and asks to show how to repeat the technique. He shouts why, and he explains that he was scared and couldn't do anything. Then one says the job isn't finished yet, ordering him to be ready next time, while the other explains he wasn't scared, but simply surprised. The man turns to the master. The man asks if he can be considered his first friend. Ray is surprised, and he explains that he doesn't understand why Carlos says such nonsense. At the same time, he explains that he does not understand what is wrong with him and how he could not notice such a colossus. He says, "Boss," and the text tells about Chapter 6, titled, "The True Form of the Ship-Eating Demon." Plus, the ship-eating demon is a giant kraken, and Ray explains that it's still somewhere underneath them. He screams as a giant tentacle appears in front of him. Additionally, one character calls the situation a battle of attrition, while another is surprised and admits to being nervous. Ray said the situation was out of control. Finally, the octopus tells him to get out, and the man turns back with a question. He's surprised by the change and asks if someone called them. Ray explains that he's leaving the change with them because playing with it would be boring, and encourages Carlos to move on, to which he agrees. After which he explains that in front of them is a legendary demon that devours ships, which is not the same kraken that will appear in 300 years, but this one is also not bad. The man says the size of the story should be like a small island while a giant octopus attacks the ship. Once they defeat the kraken, the monsters will disappear. He asks if he can avoid death. Ray shouts to the black-haired man. Then one of the men notices the danger and the other prepares to attack with a sword. Ray strikes, and the man watches silently, squeezing his hand. He then expresses surprise that he decided to watch his back. He explains that he saved him and will be grateful for the rest of his life. Ray says he saved a life and suggests being grateful for the rest of his life. He explains that you can't be in someone's debt, even for a second. Meanwhile, one says to get out of the way, and the other explains that he is ready to fight the monster. He warns them to be careful, and Ray says that Carlos amazes him. And then he says that he took the other one not for protection, and the other one explains that his hands are also busy and he was interested in seeing how they grew. The man says the number of limbs isn't decreasing, so perhaps the main body is the target. Ray admits he's considered an idiot, and he's realized it. At the same time, he explains that telepathy allows one to transmit a voice over a long distance, and says that they need to get rid of it as soon as possible, and the man says that because of the many monsters they are retreating. Ray warns him not to hit the ship. The man thanks him and asks what to do next. Moreover, one declines the offer, while the other expresses gratitude for the risk for the sake of the people and promises to tell about the deed. Ray reports that Clinton's ship is sailing. He also points out a more serious problem and suggests dealing with it later. They then discuss how the enemy is hiding his head underwater, which will require more spells. He asks if they will read it. Ray is surprised that he is considered an unworthy weakling, and the man apologizes and explains that he does not understand powerful magic well. He ends up telling Carlos about advanced magic, explaining that it's just a classification made up by botanists. The man says that many in the Lightres family possess large reserves of magical power. He is amazed by how the master uses increasingly astonishing magic. Ray warns that he could damage the ship. He then casts a powerful spell and tells him to hide, while the other man shouts that he must control himself and says that the target is now under the ship and he is aiming at an angle. He announces that they are going to destroy the ship and many people jump into the water. When Ray cast the darkness spell, dark tentacles ejected several people, one of whom screamed in pain. He says he never thought about catching guys who can barely stand on their feet. The other thanks him. Then the man with the bandage wonders why the old man is supporting the other one, and the old man says that he got it and did a great job. He is surprised that something is rising, and the man is in shock and does not understand what is happening. Following this, he explains that he expected to see a hole through and through. Ray reports that the creature's tentacles are still moving. Another man finds this interesting, and a third orders the boss to be summoned after the ground strike. Meanwhile, he reports that they defeated the legend with magic in just one blow. Ray tells the butler guard not to touch it, then explains that he's still not sure he needs it. And then he explains that he has the same spots as Straff. He reports that the ship-eater has lived for 300 years and one of the 4 demonic beasts, Straff, has now been destroyed. At the same time, Ray says that the interlocutor is facing a legend of the future. He declares that he will be the one to defeat the demon lord, while the other is surprised by what is happening. He also explains that shadow devouring is happening and tells that what died from the shadow will be consumed by the shadow. Ray explains that the name ship-eating devil doesn't suit him and suggests another name. Furthermore, the creature explains that his name will be Straff. He says it's a nightmare and will haunt him. Ray replies that it's disrespectful, and that dark magic is terrifying. Ray explains that the magical power is growing, and there's nothing to be done. As a result, the unique magic Shadow Eater was passed down through the Light Res family. Thanks to it, he became part of the Demon King's army, actively using shadow wolves in battle and reconnaissance, earning him the nickname Shadow Chieftain. Ray explains that due to the enormous expenditure of magical power to control the shadows around the world, he had almost no strength left to fight the protagonist's group, and the leader of the shadows was defeated. After which he reports that he did not have enough magical power and advises not to abuse this power. He orders Straff to return. When the man says the job was great, Ray confirms it. He declares they've dealt with the monsters and are returning to Roguebelt. He's surprised he was able to recruit the ship-eater to his side. Ray then asks if it's over and explains that he feels like it's not over yet, and he's wondering about the reasons for the monster attacks and the Demon King's revival. He reports that Clinton's ship was heading in the indicated direction and is surprised by the fireworks. They discuss the possibility that the explosion likely occurred on Clinton's ship, which he is unable to contact. Following this, Ray points out the presence of monsters in that direction. The man notes the need to thank whoever distracted the monsters, which is why the ship-eater was alone. He says it's a shame they couldn't save him and laughs. Meanwhile, Ray notices an explosion on the water and says that the monsters only cleaned up the trash for them. He is surprised that something is approaching at great speed and screams. And then Ray declared that he was not the ship-eater and ordered to prepare for battle, claiming that everything was not over yet. There's a severe storm on board the ship. The waves and wind are raging, creating a dangerous situation for the crew. Meanwhile, several people are screaming about headaches. Ray explains that even ordinary people feel the pressure of magical force and is certain it's one of the 4 demonic beasts. He shouts at the boss to get up and explains that this is a medicine for the mind, and the boss asks him to forgive him. Moreover, Ray orders the removal of any immobile soldiers from the deck, as they are hindering the battle. The man is surprised that he will have to fight alone and coughs. He orders them to remain silent and keep an eye on the team so that no one gets hurt. The second one confirms his understanding. He also informs them that they have been caught and will now have to work on the ship, to which the others nod in agreement. He asks if only she can move. In the end, the man listens silently, and Ray wonders why he didn't immediately notice the approach of the ship devourer due to his addiction to powerful magical power. He claims that everything is under control, after which he asks what is already here, and the man explains that he doesn't know and that this is what sank the escaped ship. Ray says the ship won't be able to escape and they'll have to fight. When he asks if they are ready to die, she is surprised. The man declares his readiness to sacrifice his life on command, shouting that he won't die and that everyone will return alive. Ray calls him naive. Then he yells that it was cool, and he tells you to shut your mouth. Ray says he's getting closer. Following this, he claims that he remembers the enemy's appearance and is ready to fight at the first opportunity. Ray is silent. The man explains. The other one is surprised and asks. Meanwhile, a huge flying whale hovers above the ship at sea. He is surprised by the absence of a monster in the story.